Urbanization is a population shift from rural to urban areas, the gradual increase in the proportion of people living in urban areas, and the ways in which each society adapts to the change. It is predominantly the process by which towns and cities are formed and become larger as more people begin living and working in central areas. The United Nations projected that half of the world's population would live in urban areas at the end of 2008. It is predicted that by 2050 about 64% of the developing world and 86% of the developed world will be urbanized. That is equivalent to approximately 3 billion urbanites by 2050, much of which will occur in Africa and Asia. Notably, the United Nations has also recently projected that nearly all global population growth from 2015 to 2030 will be absorbed by cities, about 1.1 billion new urbanites over the next 15 years. Urbanization is relevant to a range of disciplines, including geography, sociology, economics, urban planning, and public health. The phenomenon has been closely linked to modernization, industrialization, and the sociological process of rationalization. Urbanization can be seen as a specific condition at a set time or as an increase in that condition over time. So urbanization can be quantified either in terms of, say, the level of urban development relative to the overall population, or as the rate at which the urban proportion of the population is increasing. Urbanization creates enormous social, economic and environmental changes, which provide an opportunity for sustainability with the potential to use resources more efficiently, to create more sustainable land use and to protect the biodiversity of natural ecosystems. Urbanization is not merely a modern phenomenon, but a rapid historic transformation of human social roots on a global scale, whereby predominantly rural culture is being rapidly replaced by predominantly urban culture. The first major change in settlement patterns was the accumulation of hunter-gatherers into villages many thousand years ago. Village culture is characterized by common bloodlines, intimate relationships, and communal behavior, whereas urban culture is characterized by distant bloodlines, unfamiliar relations, and competitive behavior. This unprecedented movement of people is forecast to continue and intensify during the next few decades, mushrooming cities to sizes unthinkable only a century ago. Today, in Asia, the urban agglomerations of Osaka, Karachi, Jakarta, Mumbai, Shanghai, Manila, Seoul, and Beijing are each already home to over 20 million people, while Delhi and Tokyo are forecast to approach or exceed 40 million people each within the coming decade. Outside Asia, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, New York, Lagos, Los Angeles, and Cairo are, or soon will be, home to over 20 million people. History. From the development of the earlier cities in Mesopotamia and Egypt until the 18th century, an equilibrium existed between the vast majority of the population who engaged in subsistence agriculture in a rural context, and small centers of populations in the towns where economic activity consisted primarily of trade at markets and manufactures on a small scale. Due to the primitive and relatively stagnant state of agriculture throughout this period, the ratio of rural to urban population remained at a fixed equilibrium. With the onset of the agricultural and industrial revolution in the late 18th century, this relationship was finally broken and an unprecedented growth in urban population took place over the course of the 19th century, both through continued migration from the countryside and due to the tremendous demographic expansion that occurred at that time. In England, the proportion of the population living in cities jumped from 17% in 1801 to 72% in 1891. As labourers were freed up from working the land due to higher agricultural productivity, they converged on the new industrial cities like Manchester and Birmingham, which were experiencing a boom in commerce, trade and industry. Growing trade around the world also allowed cereals to be imported from North America and refrigerated meat from Australasia and South America. Spatially, cities also expanded due to the development of public transport systems, which facilitated commutes of longer distances to the city center for the working class. Urbanization rapidly spread across the Western world and, since the 1950s, it has begun to take hold in the developing world as well. At the turn of the 20th century, just 15% of the world population lived in cities. According to the UN, the year 2007 witnessed the turning point when more than 50% of the world population were living in cities, for the first time in human history. Movement. As more and more people leave villages and farms to live in cities, urban growth results. The rapid growth of cities like Chicago in the late 19th century, Tokyo in the mid-20th, and Delhi in the 21st century can be attributed largely to rural-urban migration. This kind of growth is especially commonplace in developing countries. This phenomenal growth can be attributed not just to the lure of economic opportunities, but also to loss or degradation of farmland and pastureland due to development, pollution, land grabs, or conflict. The attraction and anonymity of hedonistic pleasures of urban areas, proximity and ease of mass transport, and the opportunity to assert individualism. Urban centers are seen by many as an opportunity to escape traditional patriarchy and experience new freedoms. This includes greater access to education, health, and employment. However, for many who seek these opportunities, the opposite occurs, resulting in extreme poverty, exclusion, vulnerability and marginalization due to urban sprawl, where urban land is expanding much faster than the urban population. This results in a strain on the urban area. The urban poor are forced to create slums, and then ultimately face unhealthy living conditions without access to the very opportunities they sought in the first place. The United Nations Population Fund estimated that residents in slums had risen to about 863 million in 2012 from over 650 million in 1990. The rapid urbanization of the world's population over the 20th century is described in the 2005 revision of the UN World Urbanization Prospects report. The global proportion of urban population rose dramatically from 13% in 1900 to 29% in 1950, and 49% in 2005. The same report projected that the figure is likely to rise to 60% by 2030. It is expected that from 2007 to 2050, the global urban population will nearly double, absorbing all population growth and as well as inflows from rural areas. According to the UNFPA State of the World Population 2007 report, sometime in the middle of 2007, the majority of people worldwide lived in towns or cities. For the first time in history, this is referred to as the arrival of the urban millennium, or the tipping point. In future, it is estimated 93% of urban growth will occur in developing nations, with 80% of urban growth occurring in Asia and Africa. Urbanization rates vary between countries. The United States and United Kingdom have a far higher urbanization level than India, Swaziland and Niger, but a far slower annual urbanization rate, since much less of the population is living in a rural area. Some nations make a distinction between suburban and urban areas, while others do not. Indeed, human conditions within such areas differ greatly. Urbanization in the United States never reached the Rocky Mountains in locations such as Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Telluride, Colorado, Taos, New Mexico, Douglas County, Colorado, and Aspen, Colorado. The state of Vermont has also been affected, as has the coast of Florida, the Birmingham-Jefferson County, area, the Pacific Northwest and the Barrier Islands of North Carolina. In the United Kingdom, two major examples of new urbanization are in Swindon, Wiltshire and Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire. These two towns show some of the quickest growth rates in Europe. Causes. Urbanization occurs as individual, commercial flight, Social and government action reduce the time and expense of commuting and transportation and improve opportunities for jobs, education, housing, and transportation. Living in a city can provide opportunities of proximity, diversity, and marketplace competition. Suburbanization, which is happening in the cities of the largest developing countries, may be regarded as an attempt to balance these negative aspects of urban life while still allowing access to the large extent of shared resources. In cities, money, services, wealth and opportunities are centralized. Many rural inhabitants come to the city to seek their fortune and alter their social position. Businesses, which provide jobs and exchange capital, are more concentrated in urban areas. Whether the source is trade or tourism, it is also through the ports or banking systems, commonly located in cities, that foreign money flows into a country. Many people move into cities for the economic opportunities, but this does not fully explain the very high recent urbanization rates in places like China and India. Rural flight is a contributing factor to urbanization. In rural areas, often on small family farms or collective farms in villages, it has historically been difficult to access manufactured goods. Though the relative overall quality of life is very subjective, and may certainly surpass that of the city, farm living has always been susceptible to unpredictable environmental conditions, and in times of drought, flood or pestilence, survival may become extremely problematic. Thai farmers are seen as poor, stupid, and unhealthy. As young people flee the farms, the values and knowledge of rice farming and the countryside are fading, including the tradition of long kek, helping neighbors plant, harvest, or build a house. We are losing what we call Thainess, the values of being kind, helping each other, having mercy and gratefulness. I.A.M. Thongdi, Professor of Humanities, Mahidol University in Bangkok, in a New York Times article concerning the acute migration away from farming in Thailand. Life as a farmer was described as hot and exhausting. Everyone says the farmer works the hardest but gets the least amount of money. In an effort to counter this impression, the Agriculture Department of Thailand is seeking to promote the impression that farming is honorable and secure. However, in Thailand, urbanization has also resulted in massive increases in problems such as obesity. City life, especially in modern urban slums of the developing world, is certainly hardly immune to pestilence or climatic disturbances such as floods, yet continues to strongly attract migrants. Examples of this were the 2011 Thailand floods and 2007 Jakarta flood. Urban areas are also far more prone to violence, drugs, and other urban social problems. In the United States, industrialization of agriculture has negatively affected the economy of small and middle-sized farms and strongly reduced the size of the rural labor market. These are the costs of participating in the urban economy. Your increased income is cancelled out by increased expenditure. In the end, you have even less left for food. Madhura Swaminathan, economist at Kolkata's Indian Statistical Institute, particularly in the developing world, conflict over land rights due to the effects of globalization has led to less politically powerful groups, such as farmers, losing or forfeiting their land, resulting in obligatory migration into cities. In China, where land acquisition measures are forceful, there has been far more extensive and rapid urbanization than in India, where peasants form militant groups to oppose such efforts. Obligatory and unplanned migration often results in rapid growth of slums. This is also similar to areas of violent conflict, where people are driven off their land due to violence. Bogotá, Colombia is one example of this. Cities offer a larger variety of services, including specialist services not found in rural areas. These services requires workers, resulting in more numerous and varied job opportunities. Elderly people may be forced to move to cities where there are doctors and hospitals that can cater for their health needs. Varied and high-quality educational opportunities are another factor in urban migration, as well as the opportunity to join, develop, and seek out social communities. Urbanization also creates opportunities for women that are not available in rural areas. This creates a gender-related transformation where women are engaged in paid employment and have access to education. This may cause fertility to decline. However, women are sometimes still at a disadvantage due to their unequal position in the labor market, their inability to secure assets independently from male relatives, and exposure to violence. People in cities are more productive than in rural areas. An important question is whether this is due to agglomeration effects or whether cities simply attract those who are more productive. Economists have recently shown that there exists a large productivity gain due to locating in dense agglomerations. It is thus possible that agents locate in cities in order to benefit from these agglomeration effects. Dominant conurbation. The dominant conurbation of a country can benefit to a greater extent from the same things cities offer, making them magnets for not just the non-urban population, but also urban and suburban population from other cities. Dominant conurbations are quite often primate cities, but do not have to be. For instance, Greater Manila is rather a conurbation than a city. Its 20 million overall population make it very much a primate city, but Quezon City, the largest municipality in Greater Manila, and Manila, the capital, are not. A conurbation's dominance can be measured by output, wealth, and especially population, each expressed as a percentage of an entire country. Greater Seoul is one conurbation with massive dominance over South Korea. It is home to 50% of the entire national population. Though Greater Busan, Ulsan and Greater Osaka exhibit strong dominance in their respective countries, yet they are losing population to their even more dominant rivals, Seoul and Tokyo respectively. Economic effects. As cities develop, effects can include a dramatic increase and change in costs, often pricing the local working class out of the market, including such functionaries as employees of the local municipalities. For example, Eric Hobsbawm's book The Age of Revolution, 1789–1848, Chapter 11, stated, "Urban development in our period, 1789–1848, was a gigantic process of class segregation, which pushed the new laboring poor into great morasses of misery outside the centers of government and business and the newly specialized, residential areas of the bourgeoisie." The almost universal European division into a good West End and a poor East End of large cities developed in this period. This is likely due to the prevailing southwest wind, which carries coal smoke and other airborne pollutants downwind, making the western edges of towns preferable to the eastern ones. Similar problems now affect the developing world. Rising inequality resulting from rapid urbanization trends. The drive for rapid urban growth and often efficiency can lead to less equitable urban development. Think tanks such as the Overseas Development Institute have proposed policies that encourage labor-intensive growth as a means of absorbing the influx of low-skilled and unskilled labor. One problem these migrant workers are involved with is the growth of slums. In many cases, the rural-urban low-skilled or unskilled migrant workers, attracted by economic opportunities in urban areas, cannot find a job and afford housing in cities and have to dwell in slums. Urban problems, along with infrastructure developments, are also fueling suburbanization trends in developing nations. Though the trend for core cities in said nations tends to continue to become evidenter, urbanization is often viewed as a negative trend. But there are positives in the reduction of expenses in commuting and transportation while improving opportunities for jobs, education, housing, and transportation. Living in cities permits individuals and families to take advantage of the opportunities of proximity and diversity. While cities have a greater variety of markets and goods than rural areas, infrastructure congestion, monopolization, high overhead costs, and the inconvenience of cross-town trips frequently combine to make marketplace competition harsher in cities than in rural areas. In many developing countries where economies are growing, the growth is often erratic, and based on a small number of industries. For young people in these countries, barriers exist such as lack of access to financial services and business advisory services, investment in human capital so that young people have access to quality education and infrastructure to enable access to educational facilities is imperative to overcoming economic barriers.